Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. In this video, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on a film that I recently picked up in the latest Barnes & Noble Criterion Collection sale, and it is The Hit. This is the 1994 film that was directed by Stephen Frears. It's a British film, and it stars John Hurt, Terence Stamp, Tim Roth, and Laura Del Sol. And I'm going to share with you my thoughts on this film, what I think about this film. I'll tell you what I think about the video and audio quality, and I'll talk about the supplemental package and whether or not I would recommend this Criterion Collection title. So right off the bat, one of the things that this film has going for it is the strength of its cast, okay? Of course, you've got John Hurt, who famously played in The Elephant Man and has played in many films, a fantastic actor. You've got Terence Stamp, who of course famously played General Zod in the Superman movies of the 70s and has also played in a number of different films throughout the years, including a couple of films highlighted in the Criterion Collection. You've got Tim Roth, who's played in a couple of Tarantino films like Pulp Fiction and The Hateful Eight. And you've got Laura Del Sol, who's a Spanish actress who played in Carmen and several other films. And I think that's the strongest aspect of this film is the acting and the characters that are portrayed in this film and the way they're able to deliver these performances playing these characters in this movie. I think that's the strength of this film and what really carries it for me. Okay, so this Blu-ray edition from Criterion of The Hit is a Blu-ray upgrade of the 2009 DVD. It's spine number 469. So this is one of those titles that whenever I would go into Barnes & Noble for a July or a November sale, I would always see this DVD and I would always think to myself, you know what, I don't know what that movie's about, but it looks interesting. I know it has Terence Stamp and John Hurt. It's probably a good movie and I want to check it out, but I never pulled the trigger on buying the DVD because I was always wondering, are they gonna upgrade this one to Blu-ray? This is one that I'm pleasantly surprised that they finally upgraded to Blu-ray. I was not guessing that they were going to do that, and so when they announced it a few months back, I was very happy to hear that so that I could finally pick up this movie and share my thoughts on it. All right, so in a nutshell, The Hit is about a character named Parker, who's played by Terence Stamp. He is an informant, a supergrass, who basically ratted out his associates 10 years earlier in this movie. And he's testifying against his fellow compatriots, criminal compatriots, and sending them off to prison, and he somehow works a deal with the authorities to get freedom. And he's lived the last 10 years in Spain in a remote village in exile. So he's hiding out for the last 10 years in exile. So he's in exile in Spain. He's been in exile in Spain for the past 10 years, and eventually the past catches up with him. And we see this theme played out in a lot of different movies, right? Where a criminal goes out into hiding, he has a past, but his past catches up with him. You can't escape your past, and Parker is no exception to this. He gets kidnapped and he's delivered to hitman Braddock, who's played by John Hurt, and his understudy or his apprentice played by Tim Roth named Myron. And this is at the direction of one of the people that Parker had betrayed 10 years ago. And so the idea is kidnap Parker, deliver him to Braddock and Myron so they can deliver Parker back to Paris to pay for his crimes, basically be executed for ratting out his friends. So Braddock and Myron have Parker. They eventually kidnap a girl named Maggie, who's played by Laura Del Sol. Her character is the girlfriend of an apartment owner. Braddock kills the apartment owner, and he and Myron take Parker and Maggie, and they embark on their road trip from Spain to the border of France so they can deliver Parker to the people who want to dispose of Parker back in France. So in summary, The Hit is a crime road trip movie, and it's all about these four characters who are on a trip together from Spain to the southern border of France to deliver Parker to the folks who want him to pay for ratting them out 10 years ago. So it's a road trip movie, and it's actually a pretty good road trip movie overall. This isn't one of my favorite road trip movies, but it's a pretty good road trip movie, and I would describe it as being a very contemplative road trip type movie, which most road trip movies are. It really makes you think about the characters and think about what's going on in their hearts and in their motivations and their psyche. So what makes this movie work is the strength of the acting, the strength of the characters, and the dynamics of these actors working off of and playing off of each other. You see Terence Stamp's Parker pitting Braddock and Myron against each other. You see how he plants seeds of doubt and mistrust between them and just plays these psychological games with them throughout this film. And Terence Stamp is absolutely masterful in this role of Parker. He plays this calm, cool, collected, serene individual who, for most of the movie, appears to have accepted the inevitability of death, all up to a certain point. And then on top of that, you have Laura Del Sol's Maggie character, and you see how her character plays into the dynamic of this film in the way that her character bounces off of each of the other three characters. So for example, Myron sees Maggie as a potential love interest. He is very infatuated with her, Tim Roth's character. You see Braddock, who has a deep distrust of Maggie's character, and as he learns more about who she is and what she's about, that mistrust grows throughout the film. And you actually see in this film Braddock and Maggie getting into some pretty brutal physical confrontations, some pretty brutal fights in this film that is very visceral to watch. There's a couple of scenes in this film that are pretty brutal, and I think that's one of the interesting aspects of this movie. And then of course how she plays off of Terence Stamp's character. And so there's that dynamic between the three male leads, and then Maggie's character brings another interesting dynamic to the overall picture. And so these four acting leads are really what carry this film and make this a pretty good film. So along this road trip, in addition to the dynamics of playing off of each other, they're also doing some pretty wicked things on the side. They're killing people along the way as they make their way from Spain to the southern border of France. And they're also evading the authorities along the way. So it's a pretty interesting road trip movie that has some nice dynamics that are going on. It's not one of my favorite road trip movies, I'll be honest with you. I found myself a little bored with some of the pacing in this film, but overall this is a really strong movie, and I think the acting is what really carries it more than anything else. So overall, I would rate this as a solid movie. I would say, you know, if you're a fan of this film, this edition is really a no-brainer from Criterion. Otherwise, I would say definitely pick this up on a sale. In addition to the acting in this film, one of the things I really appreciated about this road trip movie is because they're making this trip from Spain to the southern border of France, you're seeing some really interesting landscapes in this film. And I think the landscapes and the scenery and the overall photography and the cinematography are very captivating. And seeing these characters as part of that landscape, that they're just little people, little characters, part of a bigger landscape, I think is one of the themes of this movie that I think works really well. I think one of the more beautiful scenes is one of the scenes toward the end of the film. That's probably a pretty famous scene in this movie. It's between John Hurt's character Braddock and Terence Stamp's Parker. And John Hurt is looking up at Terence Stamp's character. You see Terence Stamp turn around and his head is silhouetted in white and he almost looks angelic, if you would. It's sort of symbolic of the serenity that Terence Stamp's Parker has displayed throughout the film, and really just the acceptance of death and the inevitability of it. And I think his character even knows that the end for him is coming. And so it's a really interesting scene. I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes in this movie. It's like almost like a rainforest type of a scene. And I highly, highly recommend checking out that scene because it's absolutely beautiful from a photography standpoint. So I enjoyed that. The other aspect of this film that's really strong is the soundtrack. The music is really good in this movie, and it features some songs from Eric Clapton. And the music really helps set the tone and the mood of this film. And I really appreciated that about The Hit. And I think the music overall is part of what makes The Hit a pretty good movie as well. All right, so let's talk about the video and audio presentation. How does this Criterion Collection edition look and sound on Blu-ray? And as I said before, I've seen this DVD edition of this film on shelves at Barnes & Noble for years before Criterion upgrade this to Blu-ray. I never had a chance to see the DVD edition, but I can only imagine that this is a nice upgrade over that DVD edition. This picture on Blu-ray looks very nice. It looks very strong. So on the back here, it's described as a restored 2K digital transfer approved by the director of photography, Mike Malloy, with an uncompressed monaural soundtrack. It's always nice to see that a restoration has been approved by either the director and or the cinematographer or director of photography. And this restoration was approved by the cinematographer, Mike Malloy. So that's good to see. And this is a 2K digital transfer and it looks really nice on Blu-ray. I mean, this is a very nice looking film, and given that it is a road trip movie and you're seeing all these beautiful landscapes, I think they're very nicely realized in this Blu-ray edition. It is not as tack sharp as a modern day film, but it's a very nice restored high definition image and it looks really good. It's a film from the 1980s, so it has that look to it, but is beautifully cleaned up, beautifully restored, has a nice organic looking appearance, and it looks very strong on Blu-ray, so I would certainly recommend it based upon the video presentation. From an audio standpoint, as I mentioned, it's an uncompressed monaural soundtrack. It sounds pretty good. It's not a 5.1, 7.1 DTS HD mix or anything like that, so it's not the most up-to-date sound design or whatever you want to call it, but it sounds solid. It sounds really good. The dialogue comes across really nicely. The music sounds pretty good. The overall atmosphere of the movie sonically comes across very well on this Blu-ray. So overall, this is a very strong presentation on Blu-ray from a video and audio standpoint. I really enjoyed it. It looked good, it sounded good, and this is a solid release from Criterion from a presentation standpoint. Okay, so let's talk about the supplements on this edition. Overall, this is a fairly light edition from Criterion, okay? There's really only a few features on this disc. This edition does feature an audio commentary from 2009 featuring director Stephen Frears, actors John Hurt and Tim Roth, screenwriter Peter Prince, and editor Mick Audsley. Overall, this is a pretty nice commentary track. They cover some interesting aspects of the making of this film as you're watching this movie that I really appreciated. One of the parts they talked about, in one of the scenes you'll see an overhead shot with Braddock and Maggie's character and their interaction in that overhead shot. I won't spoil it for you, but there is a really cool overhead shot in this movie, and they go into detail describing how they set that up, why they shot it overhead, and just gives you a little bit more insight into the film. So I found that very interesting, and overall this is a very strong commentary track, and I love to see a commentary track on a disc. I think it's one of the best supplements you can put on the disc. The other supplement on this disc that I want to talk about though is a really nice interview from 1988 with actor Terence Stamp from the television show Parkinson One-on-One. This is one of the most delightful interviews that I have ever seen an actor interview on a Criterion Collection edition. In this interview, you'll see Terence Stamp talk about his life and his background, some of the setbacks in his life, how the grief of loss affected him in his career, and how he took some time away from his career to come back to acting, and just some of his experiences working with some of the greats of cinema. He talks about working with Federico Fellini, Pasqualini. He talks about working with Marlon Brando when he was shooting Superman. And he just talks about different aspects of his career along the way and what motivates him as an actor and what he enjoys about the acting craft. It's really one of the most interesting and delightful interviews that I have seen on a Criterion Collection edition. It sort of reminds me of the Kirk Douglas interview from the Paths of Glory edition. Just a great interview of an actor. I love that interview of Kirk Douglas in that edition, so I would highly recommend checking that out if you haven't seen that. But the interview with Terence Stamp on this disc from that show is almost worth the price of admission of buying this edition, to be honest with you. It is that good. And he talks a little bit about the different films he's been on, talks a little bit about The Hit, And it's just a really nice conversation between him and Michael Parkinson from that show One-on-One from the 1980s. So highly recommend that if you pick up this edition, check out that interview with Terence Stamp. So in addition to the commentary and the excellent interview by Terence Stamp, you have, of course, a trailer on this disc. And this edition features a very nice essay called Road to Nowhere by Graham Fuller, which is an excellent essay where he talks about this film, which is really a good description of describing what this film is about. It's really a road to nowhere. I mean, these characters, you can almost tell from the very beginning, these characters, they're going from Spain to France, but you can almost tell that they're really not going anywhere. There's really a good way to describe it. And this essay talks about Stephen Frears' career. It talks about the making of the film The Hit and covers different aspects of it. And I think it's a really nice essay that you should check out as part of this edition. Of course, inside you see some nice pictures there of John Hurt's character, Braddock there. So overall, I would rate this as a solid, good movie. The actors are really good in this film. I think the characters are strong. I think the atmosphere is really strong. The landscapes, the scenery, all of those are positives about this film. And so I could recommend it on that basis. From a video and audio standpoint, this is very strong on Blu-ray from Criterion, a very strong presentation, looks good, sounds good. And so I recommend it on that basis. The special features side of this edition from Criterion is the weakest aspect of this edition, but the features that are on here are very strong. You've got a really good audio commentary, and that interview with Terence Stamp is highly recommended. So even though the features are light and there's only a few of them, the features on here are very good. And there's a very nice essay in the little insert here from Graham Fuller that you should check out. So overall, I would recommend this edition from Criterion. I would recommend this more of on a sale. So definitely when the July sale comes up later this year, the November sale comes up, or maybe even a Criterion flash sale, that would be a good time to pick up this edition of The Hit if you don't already have it. So I would definitely recommend it. All right, so there you have it. That's my thoughts on The Hit, the Blu-ray edition of Spine number 469 from the Criterion Collection. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about this movie? Is this a movie that you've seen? If so, what do you think about it? Do you have this edition from Criterion? What do you think about this movie? What do you think about the characters, the actors in this film? Let me know in the comments below what you think about The Hit. And also let me know what other movies from the Criterion Collection that you're watching. And let me know what movies you are looking forward to in general for the remainder of the year. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll look to see you next time at the movies. Peace.